The entire world worships Wall Street as an impenetrable fortress of elite intelligence, where sophisticated algorithms and federal watchdogs supposedly protect every single dime. But the brutal truth is, the most exclusive investment fund in American history was nothing but a gaping financial slaughterhouse, swallowing billions without ever executing a single legitimate trade. This was a sociopathic masterpiece of Bernie Madoff. Behind the carefully engineered mask of a generous financial patriarch, he operated with a terrifying void of empathy. He would sit in his immaculate office, obsessively straightening his French cuffs with an unblinking reptilian stare, silently mocking the billionaires begging to hand him their fortunes. Driven by a suffocating, paralyzing dread of being exposed as an intellectual parasite, he weaponized their own arrogance against them. He vaporized $65 billion, yet the ultimate sickening paradox remains. While the government actually clawed back billions for his victims, Madoff watched his own flesh and blood, his entire family legacy, get completely eradicated from the earth through suicide and disease. In this video, I will expose exactly how he manipulated the global elite into absolute submission and reveal the laughably primitive machine he kept locked away to blindfold the entire federal government for decades. Step back to Wall Street in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The air in lower Manhattan was incredibly thick, with the scent of unbridled greed and expensive cigars. This was the absolute golden era of American finance, a time when the ultra-rich, the massive hedge fund managers, and the old money dynasties lived inside an intoxicating, dangerous illusion. They genuinely believed they were completely invincible. They demanded an impossible financial paradox from the universe. They wanted their massive portfolios to grow by double digits every single year. But they completely refused to accept even a fraction of a percent of risk. But the global stock market is a feral, unpredictable beast. When the economic crashes hit, the trading floors turned into absolute slaughterhouses. Imagine grown men in bespoke, tailored suits weeping openly on the floor, watching paper ticker tapes bleed red ink as tens of millions of dollars vaporized into thin air within mere minutes. Palatial estates, generational trust funds, and entire corporate empires were violently pushed to the brink of total annihilation before the closing bell even rang. The most agonizing pain for the global elite was not just losing a few $1 million. The true, terrifying nature was a sudden and suffocating realization of their own total impotence. They were forced to look in the mirror and understand that despite their private jets and political connections, they had absolutely no control over the chaotic heartbeat of the global economy. If this wild volatility continued, their prestigious family legacies would be permanently at the mercy of unpredictable, devastating market crashes. This desperate, fearful environment was a perfect breeding ground for a predator, one who had been forged by deep humiliation. Years earlier, a young Bernie Madoff stood in the opulent, mahogany-lined office of a prominent Wall Street patriarch, desperately pitching his early brokerage services. The older billionaire did not even bother to look up from his morning newspaper. He took a very slow sip of his scotch, let the dead silence stretch until it became physically uncomfortable, and delivered a crushing blow. "You are just a glorified plumber from Queens fixing the pipes of my wealth, Bernie. Do not ever confuse yourself with the architect." Madoff did not argue or defend himself. He stood perfectly still, carefully adjusting his cufflinks with a hollow, accommodating smile. But in that exact moment of intense humiliation, staring at the sheer blinding arrogance of the elite, a cold-blooded philosophy took root in his mind. He realized that the wealthy were completely blinded by their own ego, and if you simply feed their pride, they will blindly hand you the keys to their entire fortunes. The global elite were bleeding and terrified of the free market. They did not want a smart analyst who could predict the financial weather. They desperately craved a financial dictator, a silent god who could completely bend the laws of supply and demand to guarantee their absolute safety. They were practically begging to be manipulated. But then the entire paradigm shifted violently when Bernie Madoff opened the heavy wooden doors to the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan. While the rest of the financial world was desperately sweating on chaotic, deafening trading floors, begging for capital and promising the moon to hesitant investors, Madoff sat in complete unsettling silence inside his mahogany-lined office. He did not look for clients. He made the clients brutally hunt for him. This was not a mere business strategy. It was a psychological masterclass in absolute domination. Madoff understood that the global elite, despite their immense wealth, were completely driven by their own colossal egos and paralyzing insecurities. They did not just want wealth. They wanted access to rooms where others were explicitly forbidden. He became the ultimate gatekeeper of the most exclusive financial club in human existence. First, he used the sheer gravitational pull of consistent money to brutally crush the competition. Instead of playing the traditional game of chasing high risk for high rewards, Madoff introduced his signature split-strike conversion strategy. On paper, he claimed to buy a massive basket of reliable blue-chip stocks and simultaneously purchase options contracts to act as an ironclad insurance policy against sudden market drops. It sounded incredibly sophisticated, a perfect mathematical shield against the unpredictable violence of the global economy. In reality, it was a total phantom, a ghost story told to billionaires. But the elite investors did not care about the physical reality. They only cared about the ink on the paper. While the rest of Wall Street suffered through agonizing market crashes, geopolitical crisis, and the unpredictable swings of the 1980s and 1990s, Madoff delivered a flat, impossible line of steady returns. Month after month, year after year, he returned a clockwork 10 to 12%. He did not defeat his rivals by running faster or analyzing better. He completely eradicated them by being the only player who seemingly defied the fundamental laws of financial gravity. One rainy afternoon, a highly influential European hedge fund manager walked into Madoff's immaculate office, radiating the typical blinding arrogance of old money. He placed a massive leather portfolio on the desk, aggressively demanding a detailed independent audit of the internal trading records before committing an initial $50 million. The manager leaned back, crossing his arms, fully expecting Madoff to scramble, negotiate, and bend the knee for the massive injection of capital. Madoff did not speak. He slowly removed his gold reading glasses, placed them meticulously aligned with the exact edge of his desk, and let an agonizing, suffocating silence fill the room for 2 full minutes. He stared directly into the manager's eyes with an unblinking reptilian coldness that stripped the oxygen from the room. Finally, he leaned forward and whispered with a voice entirely devoid of emotion or hesitation, "Take your $50 million and walk out that door right now. Because if you ask me for another piece of paper, you will never be allowed to invest a single dime with this firm for the rest of your natural life." The hedge fund manager panicked. His immense pride was instantly shattered by the sheer freezing weight of the rejection. He immediately apologized, abandoned his demands, and signed the contract completely blind, desperate to remain in the presence of power. He had successfully weaponized the arrogance of the elite, turning their relentless demand for exclusivity into a tight psychological leash. But gathering the initial billions was only the very first phase of the operation. How do you construct a fortress so impenetrable that even the most aggressive federal regulators and seasoned investigators are completely paralyzed? The answer lies in the systematic weaponization of political gravity and the law itself. Madoff did not just hide in the shadows away from the Securities and Exchange Commission. He boldly walked right through their front doors and sat at the head of their tables. He leveraged his immense prestige as a former chairman of the Nasdaq stock market to build an impenetrable aura of absolute legitimacy. He sat on the very governmental advisory committees that dictated the trading rules and regulations for the entire American financial system. When young, ambitious federal regulators came knocking at his door to investigate persistent rumors, they were not interrogating a suspect. They were essentially auditing their own untouchable boss. He overwhelmed them with his sheer political weight, casually name-dropping the highest officials in Washington, and utilizing his deep systemic connections to dismiss any external complaints as a jealous, pathetic whining of inferior competitors who simply could not comprehend his financial genius. Think of the global financial market as a massive, heavily guarded casino. Every player at the table is forced to show their cards to the dealer, proving they are playing by the strict rules of the house. But Madoff was not a player. He convinced the casino owners that he was the one who manufactured the playing cards and built the tables. So while everyone else was being aggressively strip-searched at the door for cheating, he simply walked past security carrying duffel bags full of stolen chips. And the armed guards actually bowed to him in deep respect as he passed. He had neutralized the government and completely subjugated the billionaires of Wall Street. Yet a Ponzi scheme of this unprecedented astronomical magnitude requires a constant raging river of fresh capital to simply survive another day. He could not rely on individual rich people in New York forever. He needed an industrial global pump. He needed a mechanism that would automatically drain the global economy without him ever lifting a single physical finger. Madoff expanded his dark empire by establishing a vast, intricate global network of feeder funds. These were massive, supposedly independent investment firms operating out of wealthy havens like Geneva, London, and the Caribbean. These feeder funds acted as colossal vacuum cleaners, blindly sweeping up the life savings of European aristocrats. Massive institutional pension funds and major international banks, only to dump every single penny directly into Madoff's black box on the 17th floor. The brilliant, sickening reality of this structure was that Madoff successfully outsourced the crime. He let these prestigious international banks do the dirty work of selling the illusion to the public. The banks charged their clients massive management fees for doing absolutely nothing except blindly handing the money over to Madoff. By allowing the global financial institutions to wet their beaks and take a huge cut of the illegal profits, he turned the entire banking system into his willing, greedy accomplices. They became hopelessly addicted to his steady returns. They completely stopped asking questions, actively ignoring glaring red flags because finding out the truth would instantly destroy their own massive, effortless profit margins. He had successfully infected the global financial bloodstream, locking the entire world into his toxic matrix. But there was one final glaring flaw in this masterpiece of deception. If tens of billions of dollars were supposedly flowing in and out of the market, how could he possibly fake the millions of individual trading records required to blindfold the elite auditors year after year? The solution was not a supercomputer or a team of brilliant hackers. It was a laughably primitive, deafening machine hidden in plain sight. While the 19th floor of the Lipstick Building housed a completely legitimate state-of-the-art trading firm with glowing computer screens flashing real-time global market data, the 17th floor was a strictly locked archaic dungeon. This was the true engine room of the slaughterhouse. Down here, Madoff employed a small, isolated army of uneducated, fiercely loyal clerks who had absolutely no real understanding of finance. They did not use advanced financial software or complex high-frequency algorithms. They used an ancient, overheating IBM dot matrix printer. This primitive, noisy machine operated relentlessly around the clock, loudly printing out thousands upon thousands of pages of completely fabricated, backdated trading statements. The physical labor of the fraud was immense and exhausting. When the real stock market closed for the day, these clerks would simply look at the historical data in the newspaper, pick the specific stocks that had already gone up in value, and then manually print out fake receipts claiming they'd bought those exact stocks earlier in the month when the price was low. They generated mountains of paper, creating an artificial paper trail so thick and confusing that it successfully buried any attempt at a logical audit. Imagine you are betting your life savings on a high-stakes horse race, but instead of placing your bet before the horses start running, the track owner allows you to wait until the race is completely over. You watch exactly which horse crosses the finish line first, and then you quietly write down your bet on a piece of paper, backdate the timestamp, and slip it into the winner's box. You win every single time, not because you're a genius at picking fast horses, but because you possess a time machine made of cheap paper and black ink. By operating this shockingly primitive fraud, Madoff completely short-circuited the highly sophisticated minds of Wall Street. The elite auditors and federal investigators came in looking for complex digital anomalies, hidden offshore shell companies, and high-frequency algorithmic manipulation. Their brains were rigidly wired to catch brilliant masterminds playing three-dimensional chess. They were entirely blind to the fact that the greatest financial crime in human history was being executed with paper, ink, and a refrigerator-sized printer from the 1980s. Madoff locked down his absolute monopoly by understanding a fundamental terrifying flaw in human psychology. People will always question a small, simple lie. They will aggressively investigate a stolen $100. But if you construct a lie so astronomically massive, so utterly brazen, and wrap it tightly in the impenetrable armor of extreme exclusivity and political power, the human brain simply refuses to process it as a deception. He became the indispensable, unshakable pillar of the global elite, a financial deity who had successfully weaponized the very concept of trust, turning the entire foundation of modern capitalism into his own personal silent slaughterhouse. The devastating result of this psychological manipulation was absolute and undeniable. Armed with nothing but blind trust and an antiquated printer, Bernie Madoff artificially inflated a phantom fortune to a staggering $65 billion. He dragged 37,000 victims across 136 different countries into complete financial ruin. Certain skeptics and naive analysts might argue that Madoff simply experienced a tragic run of bad luck. They might claim that his legitimate investment strategy was merely caught in the horrific undertow of the global financial crisis of 2008. Which triggered a massive wave of panic withdrawals that no fund could possibly survive. But looking at the cold forensic evidence, we see the terrifying truth. The reality is that Madoff did not execute a single actual stock trade for 13 consecutive years. This was not a sophisticated financial model that accidentally failed under extreme economic pressure. It was a calculated, deliberate wealth eradication machine from the very first day. However, we must confront the ultimate, sickening irony of his dark legacy. While the American government deployed massive resources and successfully clawed back over $14 billion to reimburse the shattered victims, Madoff faced a uniquely brutal punishment. He rotted away and died alone in a federal prison cell. But the true horror was what happened outside those walls. Both of his biological sons, the heirs to his toxic empire, perished shortly after his exposure through suicide and fatal illness. The predator who systematically stripped away the future and security of tens of thousands of innocent families ultimately orchestrated the complete and permanent erasure of his own bloodline from the face of the earth. The most dangerous financial predators do not hold a gun to your head. They wear perfectly tailored suits and use your own psychological blind spots to completely drain your family legacy. If you blindly hand over your financial independence to the elite simply because you are terrified of the market, you are actively choosing to remain a disposable puppet in their system. You will be nothing more than the silent liquidity funding their grand illusions. To armor your mindset against the ruthless manipulation of Wall Street and decode the dark psychology of modern power, you must learn to see the invisible strings controlling the global economy. Hit the subscribe button right now and stop letting these predators dictate your survival.